Dear Diary, recently I conducted an experiment on the monastery garden with the pea plants. I cut off the stamen of two plants with contrasting traits and cross-pollinated them myself. The resulting plants were identical to the one-parent plant, and they exhibited the same traits. However, I let these plants from the first generation self-pollinate, and, to my surprise, about a fourth of these plants exhibited different traits and showed characteristics of the other parent plant that had been omitted on the first generation of plants.
Farm of his family with his older sister. There he took an interest in gardening and beekeeping as he grew up. As a young boy, Mendel attended school in Opava, and then he went on to the University of Olomouc from 1840 to 1843. After graduating, where he studied many disciplines, including physics and philosophy, he graduated with honors. The same year, he joined the Augustinian order at the St. Thomas Monastery in Berna, and was given the name Gregor. At that time, the monastery was a cultural center for the region, and Mendel was immediately exposed to the research and teaching of its members. He also gained access to the monastery's extensive library and experimental facilities. Mendel is best known for his work with his pea plants in the AB gardens, where he spent about 7 years planting, breeding, and cultivating pea plants in the experimental part of the gardens mentioned before. Through meticulous record keeping, Mendel's experiments with pea plants became the basis for modern genetics. Mendel chose pea plants as his experimental plant for many reasons. First of all, pea plants take very little outside care and grow quickly. They also have both male and female reproductive parts, so they can either cross-pollinate or self-pollinate. Perhaps most importantly, pea plants seem to show one of only two variations of many characteristics. This made the data much more clear-cut and easier to work with. Mendel's first experiments focused on one trait at a time and on gathering data on the variations present for several generations. These were called monohybrid experiments. He studied a total of 7 characteristics. His findings showed that there were some variations that were more likely to show up over the other variations. When he bred purebred peas of different variations, he found that in the next generation of pea plants, one of the variations disappeared. When that generation was left to self-pollinate, the next generation showed a 3-to-1 ratio of the variations. He called the one that seemed to be missing from the first filial generation recessive, and the other dominant, since it seemed to hide the other characteristic. These observations led Mendel to the law of segregation. He proposed that each characteristic was controlled by 2 alleles, one from the mother and one from the father plant. The offspring would show the variations it is coded for by the dominance for the alleles. If there is no dominant allele present, then the offspring shows the characteristic of the recessive allele. These alleles are passed down randomly during fertilizations. Mendel's work wasn't truly appreciated until 1900. Long after his death, Mendel had unknowingly provided the theory of evolution with a mechanism for the passing down of traits during natural selection. His work has been added together with that of Charles Darwin to make up the modern synthesis of the theory of evolution. Much of Mendel's early work in genetics has paved the way for modern scientists working in the field.
Gregor Mendel, through his work on pea plants, discovered the fundamental laws of inheritance. He deduced that genes come in pairs and are inherited as distinct units, one from each parent. Mendel tracked the segregation of parental genes and their appearance in the offspring as dominant or recessive trait. Can you imagine having all of these discoveries being called crazy man because nobody else believed what you saw, and years later after you die being called the father of genetics? That would be something really crazy. I don't think Gregor Mendel could have think about that.
He recognized the mathematical patterns of inheritance from one generation to the next. Mendel's laws of heredity are usually stated as the law of segregation, which states that each inherited trait is defined by a gene pair. Parental genes are randomly separated to the sex cells so that these cells contain only one gene of the pair. Offspring therefore inherit one genetic allele from each parent when sex cells unite in fertilization. The second one is the law of independent assortment, which says that genes for different traits are sorted separately from one another, so that the inheritance of one trait is not dependent on the inheritance of another. And the third law is the law of dominance, which states that an organism with alternate forms of a gene will express the form that is dominant.
Personally, I think that people tend to reject things that they don't understand, and this actually has happened several times in several different moments, and not only in science. For example, Van Gogh. While he was alive, none of his artworks had any actual value. Until he actually died, people started appreciating them and the value was put over his artworks. And I think this tends to happen because society starts changing and it starts noticing things that they had forgotten or like left on the side before. And Mendel actually is one of these cases because while he was alive, his art, his work didn't have any value and nobody paid attention to it. But when he died, they actually considered him the father of genetics.